各位观众朋友们，大家好，欢迎收看 J 与 J 论坛，由我马健 Jimmy Ma 与 Jim Norway 一起与大家讨论这个礼拜的时事。How are you doing, Jim?
Hi, doing fine, Jimmy.
It's been an eventful week once again. Our weather here in Houston was horrendous the past few days.
Always, we're microclimates where we are. We seem to be. We have been spared the worst of it, but I'm hearing flooding conditions all around us.
That's right.
Not bad. The weather forecasts have not been very accurate. Normally, I'm impressed with the meteorologists and the way they forecast, but this week they've missed a lot. They've forecasted a whole lot more rain than I've seen. So, but maybe that's macho. Everybody always wants it to be worse than it is.
No, well, maybe for meteorologists, but for us, we always hope it's worse than not as bad as they predict. But what happened was we got very lucky. The front moved faster. It didn't hover over us. That's why there wasn't as much flooding. Like I said, we got to praise the Lord for sparing us. I mean, Houston's been through too much this year or the last 2 years. We need a break.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Speaking of breaks, I saw a flyer that for a business, how do I say this? A conference next week where you are one of the speakers. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how people could log in? Is it a live in-person meeting or is it online?
It's definitely a live in-person meeting at the International Trade Center next Friday, a week from tomorrow. It is hosting the ambassador from the African country of Guinea. As you may know, our mutual friend, Mr. Wei Li, is Consul General in Houston and Texas for the government of Guinea. So he represents the government of Guinea in all of the aspects that they have in Texas. And the ambassador, because Texas is so important, particularly Houston, is so important to the energy business, and that is by far the most significant part of the Guinean economy on the west coast of Africa, like it is for Nigeria and many of the other countries. They have a very strong bond with other aspects of the Houston and the Texas economy. So great trade relationships. And what they're trying to do is to expand cultural relationships. They would love to create or expand their tourism industry. They would like to take advantage of other natural resources that they have in addition to oil and gas as well, certain valuable minerals, et cetera, et cetera. So Texas is a perfect place for them to give major focus within the United States.
And it's great that you're facilitating and how do I say this? You are trying to make connections so that it could help both countries and of course help Houston. When you mention ITC, you happen to be also the chairperson of ITC. I think a lot of our audience, a lot of Houstonians don't quite understand the significance of the International Trade Center. Tell us what kind of role do you perform as the chairman of ITC?
Well, I have been co-chair of the International Trade Center since its inception in about 2007, again with our friend and colleague, Mr. Wei Li, who founded it. Wei Li founded it on the premise that Houston is a very international city and metropolitan region. It is probably the single most international economy, regional economy in the United States, much like New York or Los Angeles. But we have very few public institutions or cultural institutions that actually pay attention and help facilitate or expand international trade. Many corporations work for their own interests. And we talk amongst ourselves. We have collegiality in Houston, but we don't have a lot of collaboration. The purpose of the International Trade Center is to serve as a receiving end when people from elsewhere in the world come and want to establish business relationships or investments in Houston. Maybe somebody is moving their family, maybe they're moving their family's wealth, maybe they have other objectives for coming to the United States. We provide them an entry point and guidance. On the other hand, Houston and Texas is the fountain of a lot of small and medium-sized companies that are finding they have a market for their goods and services abroad, but many of them don't know how to behave outside the United States. They don't know how to seek out those opportunities. We are, in effect, their marketing leader, their network outside, and we can help guide them as well. So it's both inbound and outbound, and it's worked absolutely beautifully. We've had over 8,000 contacts with various businesses in the approximately 15 years we've been.
Did you say 8,000?
8,000.
Wow.
That's a number that Wei Li has given me because he and some of the other members of the International Trade Center keep very close track. We host a large number of events, just like the one that you asked about in reference to the ambassador in Guinea. Again, people from literally all over the world. We've worked with the Baker Institute at Rice University on sponsoring trade missions to Africa. Wei and I and other members of the ITC have traveled the world together to promote Houston business and to bring other people here.
Is ITC a nonprofit?
Yes, not intentionally so, but often it is. No, it is formed as a 501c3.
It's 501c, and it's not a government entity, but it functions as, like you said, as a gap. I know about ITC. I didn't know it's been 15 years. How time flies.
Yeah.
The building itself has hosted so many events before the pandemic started. It was almost weekly, luncheons and seminars and informational conferences. Now that the pandemic's over, is kicking back in gear. So I hope the folks hear that in Houston, we have a booming economy.
Well,
we're recovering.
Yeah, I think there's something in the human psyche from wherever you are in the world, whatever culture you were raised in. People want to get together. People want to talk with each other. And there is a burning desire in most people's part to interact and to trade. And down through history, a lot of prosperity has occurred because simply of trade. The economists call it comparative advantage. My advantage may be something that you would like to have and vice versa. And so we do what we each do best, and then we derive what we need from somebody else. And it really works. I think that's part of Houston's real success. I
absolutely agree. I applaud you for doing this for so long. You're absolutely right about the human need. I think God created us to have interaction. I think we're sick of online meetings. I know I am. I am sick of Zoom. Before when we're driving in Houston traffic, going from meetings and office and whatnot, we complain. I wish I could work from home. Now that our wish came true, I said, no, I need to go get back out to the office. I need to start seeing people because we're all vaccinated now. I just started seeing friends having dinner again in the last few weeks. And I don't know how to behave or act out in public anymore. It feels very odd to not have to wear a mask and see people live and actually shake hands with someone and look someone in the eye and get things done. That's how deals get made. You're right. It's mutually beneficial. And also a lot of times we work with people that we like. It's very simple. You can't really like someone or dislike someone online or in a Zoom meeting or through email.
Right. Well, I agree with you totally. And probably 80% of my conversations these days are dominated by exactly the thought that you expressed. It's great to get together again. It feels strange, but it also feels comfortable. And people have this pent-up demand, this longing to get together again.
This human connection is amazing. And then when you apply to ITC and what you've done, it doesn't matter where you are from all over the world. We all grew up differently with different cultures, whatever politics you believe in too. In the end, we're in this great city, one of the most diverse city in the United States. And every indicator, every economic number has shown that we are about to overtake, let's say New York, LA, and Chicago is ahead of us. But we're recovering much faster. Our real estate market is out of the world right now. Oil prices are rebounding. We don't have a heavy concentration technology sector here. So that cyclical nature, the volatility doesn't affect Houston as much. And Texas has no state income tax. I mean, every advantage. Look at Austin, not just Austin, Houston too, and Dallas. Every part of Texas has been booming. And I hope our audience could take advantage of it, utilize what Mr. Noteware offers pro bono, what ITC offers as a nonprofit, and take advantage of it, whatever you need to get done. Look, if you just go visit ITC, folks, I mean, it is truly amazing. This international. You have business and consulates and universities, offices there from all over the world. And there's different cultures. You see all the flags, and there's always some kind of event there where you will actually learn something or benefit from something. So I encourage everyone to try to get out there on Friday. Is there a Zoom link if somebody wants to log in? Is it played on Zoom at all?
I will find out whether.
You know what? That's okay. Let me take a look.
I'm almost certain it is, but those things are updated continuously. So
let me see. It's by invitation and register only.
Okay.
There's a number to call. There's an email, jennifer@scdaily.com. I'll ask the producers to put the information on here. So for people that are interested, because the way I look at it is that for someone that is so resourceful and knowledgeable, if you're going to take the time to offer this to the public, then the public, that we should take advantage of that. The more the merrier, because yeah, you're right. We have our honorary consul, Whaley. We have our ambassador. We have another honorary consul general from Ethiopia, and yourself. This is going to be a great meeting. So we'll have a number. You have to register first online or call this number. I'll ask them to put it out there. But the number is 281-983-8152. You can email Jennifer@scdaily.com, scdaily.com for any questions. But there should be a link for you guys to click and register. And this is next Friday from 11:30 to 1. It's essentially a lunch and learn. During lunch, a very quick 11:30 to 1 p.m. It's a very, very efficient and good way to take advantage of what ITC could offer.
Yeah.
Jim, on a different note, every week when we talk about issues or news, we never really get to go in depth because we never have enough time. And the fact is, the topics we have, we're not reporting on it. We're not just reciting what happened. We're discussing how it happened, why it happens, and perhaps solutions to how to stop that. I think that's what makes our show a little bit different. So we would like to continue, I hope, from our conversation last week regarding the economy and how the new administration and its tax changes will affect Americans, all of us, and how the market reacts and how inflation has affected us. Would you like to continue from our conversation last week?
Sure. But before we continue on with those specific items, I'd like to interject a new one that has dominated a lot of the discussions I've been having within the last week. And that is that demand is surging. You mentioned earlier in your introductory comments how fast our economy is responding. It is. But ironically, the demand side of the economy is responding much faster than the supply. And what's happening is we're finding that there are constraints along the supply chain in almost everything, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's inventory, whether it's transportation. Many, many people are complaining about not being able to get what they need. In the construction industry, one of the dominant factors right now, construction and real estate development, you can't get lumber.
Lumber prices.
You simply can't get it. And what do we have in most parts of the country? We have forests, okay? What does Canada have more than any place else in the world? Forests, softwoods. There are artificial constraints along the way there. The demand for energy, oil and gas, is absolutely surging around the world, including here in the United States and some of our customers. The demand for labor. I must see 3 or 4 articles a day regarding small business people that need to hire employees for restaurants, for other activities, and retailing. You know, we were sitting here a year ago talking about how desperate the retailing situation is in the United States, but now retailers can't find enough people to work in their stores. So in many respects, the world has turned upside down. The other thing I'm hearing about is constraints on shipping. And the imbalance. We're still getting a lot of imports from China and the Far East, but we're having a very difficult time exporting and getting our goods to market. I'm not sure that there is a solution to this or a magic wand that anybody, including the governmental administration, can do, except to try to really pay attention to it and try to resolve kinks where they can and not make things worse. But it all by itself, these constraints are causing cost increases, and they're going to take a while to hammer out. And like we talked about last week and the week before, I am very concerned about certain elements of our economy. Energy prices are way up from where they were even 6 months ago. Housing prices are way up. Food. I mean, these are the basics. And if these things are experiencing cost increases are going to go along throughout the industry. Now, one bit of good news in all of this is the value of labor is increasing. Every economist knows that value is created in part by scarcity. And so if there's a scarce amount of labor, then wages and other compensation should go up. I hope that's the case, because I think particularly at the lower end of our wage scale, because we really do need to narrow the gap in our income inequality.
Wow. No, what you just said is, I'll respond. I'm sorry. Go ahead. That was very interesting.
No. I'm finished. Good time to talk.
Jim, what you just said is very surprising to me, because that differs quite from the mainstream conservative Republican economic comments. That is definitely not the norm. What do you think? Which I obviously agree with you completely on it. But your opponents, the distractors, will say that's too liberal, that is socialistic, that raising the minimum wage or income gap would hurt businesses and owners. And you're a business owner. You employ a lot of people. So this is, I completely applaud you for saying that, because that is truth. And I want to talk to you about lumber. When you mentioned lumber, I want to respond to that. Lumber prices have been going crazy. This last week, it finally came back down. And now we know that it was being manipulated by the big players as usual, that this is unnecessary, that the majority of normal, average citizens are the ones who are paying these prices, and the profits are being used. We're being used. Profits, unnecessary profits. How do I say this? Is the monopoly?
Monopolistic profits.
Yes.
There's two things that happen as industries mature. One is consolidation. which means that there are fewer players, which means that a small number of players can effectively act as monopolies. Even though it is illegal to do so, somehow they learn how to send signals to each other. And the other thing that goes along with it is governmental protection. When industries get too consolidated, they usually can generate tariffs or other barriers to entry. And for instance, in the steel industry, President Trump made a lot of noise and a lot of enemies by putting a 25 or 30% tariff on steel imports, particularly from China. He made a lot of noise about that, 15% on aluminum. And all it did was increase every American's costs all down the supply line. So most people have considered that to be a disastrous economic consequence of what he did. But what gets forgotten about, or if people never knew to forget it in the beginning, is that we've had a 30% tariff on Canadian lumber for a very long time, because the softwood industry, or all lumber, parts of the lumber industry, are very, very tightly consolidated. There are very few players in it, very few mills anymore. And so they enjoy a lot of protection. And it works to the detriment of everyone else. And part of the problem that the government has is the government has gotten it at all levels of government, gotten itself increasingly into the construction and real estate business, whether they're funding infrastructure or new buildings or paying other people to build for them, whatever the case may be. And so it just exacerbates government expenditures and government budgets too. So we pay coming and going, and there are a few people who are doing extremely well, but everybody else is paying a little bit of the price. But when it adds up, it's very harmful. And
when the wealth gap is this large, that when the middle class is less and less, we know it's not only hurtful for the majority of Americans, but it's also very bad for the democracy. Because when resources and wealth is controlled by a few, it creates, that created a Great Depression back in the 20s and 30s. Yeah. We had to deregulate so many things. So, but regarding China, what Trump did was, the trade war that he started, the tariffs that he imposed, like you mentioned, in the end, you're right. U.S. consumers end up paying for all of the tariffs. The sad thing is they're still in place under Biden. Trump also pulled us out of the TPP, which would have given us an economic force in the region to go against China. So China said, okay, forget it. They created their own TPP without U.S. participation, weakening us, our influence in that region. And so now Biden is trying to create a new alliance with India, Japan, Australia, that all have conflicts of interest with China because they're closer to push back. And now Biden also wants to have joint talks with China, Alaska a couple of weeks ago, to warn them about our consequences. The one continuation is that this administration is the stance to view China as a threat. I am not sure if that's the way to go, because whether it's posturing or not, the fact is this new international commerce is very different before with technology. We're all tied in. Like you said, even with lumber prices, affects one part. It happening in one part of the world will affect everybody else in the world. Isolation or creating this Cold War atmosphere, I don't know if that worked. It seems like we thought we defeated Russia and Cuba and Afghanistan and Iran, but in the end, well, listen, that's going off topic, Jim. I apologize. It's very, very frightening to me when we talk about China, when we talk about trade, when we talk about commerce, because to me, that also ties into the anti-Asian hate that is going on, which we mentioned many times on the show. Because when government officials, when politicians start setting up one country as the enemy, like we did with the Russians, and I can't say they're not, Cold War, they were. But when you do that, it's very hard for people to differentiate between the government of that country is the enemy, and then differentiate between the people. And for for people that drink the Kool-Aid, they're not going to know the difference between a Japanese or a Chinese or a Korean or a Vietnamese. They're all Asian. And this Asian hate has not stopped. It's just gotten worse. And like I said before, every day there are new cases. And it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. They just passed a federal law today, anti-Asian hate crime. Yeah. And I don't know how much that would help. Civil rights took 40, 50 years, a lot of bloodshed, a lot of protests, but there are a much higher percentage of African Americans. And also, there's a certain part of the population concentrates their vote to support one party. So there's a lot more say. For Asian Americans, there's nowhere to go. There's no ACLU to go protest for them. There's no person that will speak for them because there is no Reverend Al Sharpton or anything like that. And the divide amongst the Asian communities are so wide. I mean, you're one of the few people that knows that even amongst the Chinese Americans, there's so many different groups where they don't share the same interests. Yeah. What they don't understand, all these groups is that your civil rights, your right as an American, your right to not be racially discriminated trumps everything else first. For you to save taxes and have to own guns or for your kids' education, all that doesn't matter if you are discriminated. All that doesn't matter if you don't have your basic right as a citizen. But for some reason, a lot of Asian Americans, because of immigrants, they don't get it. And the worst part is the second generation of Asian Americans, and I hate to say this, Jim, they don't appreciate, they don't understand that it is not just a right, it's a privilege to be able to vote, to run for office, to have a say in your next generation. They don't do that. They're not active in community. They don't, everyone just wants to make a lot of money and be a doctor, lawyer, and to fulfill the model minority myth. They don't understand it in this country, the way that our system is set up. You have to participate. You cannot have apathy and then when shit hits the fan, excuse my language, then go out there. I mean, Asians don't protest. There's not enough numbers of protests. Like I always use the same analogy as what the Nazis did in Germany. By the time they got to the Jews, no one else is left to speak for them because all the other groups have been eliminated. And that's what the Japanese did in China. I mean, there's one Japanese Imperial Army soldier to 50 or 60 Chinese. You're telling me 60 cannot defeat one person with a gun, but the fact is that 60 is so divided. Anyways, my rant, there's just, it all connects, right? When we look at the market, when we look at the anti-Asian hate, using China as the enemy. I am not saying that China is not. I'm saying that every sovereign nation has its own country's best interests at heart. But I just don't believe that making enemy works nowadays, as you understand, because if we relate back to International Trade Center, the goal is to facilitate trade. That's the best way to exert your influence.
Let me respond to you in two very different ways, which I think will connect explain some of the dots that you've connected. One is, I would like to believe that the rule of law in the United States is strong enough so that everyone is protected, regardless of their background. We shouldn't need an ACLU for Asian people. We shouldn't need special advocates for people. The rule of law, the legal system, they say justice is blind. It doesn't matter who you are all treated fairly. And I'm afraid that some of this rule of law is breaking down in the United States because of political pressures and political power, et cetera. But what we should really be trying to do is to go back where everybody is treated the same. And that, I believe, is part of the magic, which is why the United States has attracted so much immigration and attracted so much foreign capital here. Because whether somebody brings their money or sends their money, they know that it is protected and therefore their lifestyle. And hopefully they know or believe that their children will be similarly protected and go on into the future. That's part of the magic. And despite sometimes our frustrations here, we still have to acknowledge that the gate in America almost always swings in. In other words, more and more people want to come in. Very few, some, but very few want to leave. And I think that's part of our magic. So I'm one of the people that thinks our rule of law is pretty darn good. I don't think we need more laws. I think we need better observance and enforcement of the laws we now have. Enough on that front. The other one is, I think in our new world, we are struggling with a major distinction that many people don't understand. Used to be that countries competed with each other. And it used to be that countries were populated by people of similar ethnic origins, similar cultures, etc. Now, people spread all around. Companies spread all around. And yes, countries trade with each other, and in the countries, they're subjected to their own laws, labor laws, tax laws, those kinds of things. But really, countries don't trade with each other. Companies trade with each other. And you have many companies who are truly multinational and have interests in many different places. And they're vertically integrated from place to place to place. And so how do you look at Apple as an example? Is Apple an American company? Yes, they were started here. Their legal domicile is in Ireland. Their biggest production by far is in China. Okay? Look at the automobile industry. We think that Ford and General Motors are American corporations and Toyota is a Japanese corporation. And Mercedes is a German corporation. Well, historically, that's what it was. But for the last 50 years, they have operations and markets literally all over the world. So how can you define what's what?
Agreed.
And the interests of countries are very different than the interests of companies that form the basis of employment, investment, and all the energy, all of the momentum of the economy. And we're struggling with a push-pull. And it was brought to light about a month ago when Mr. Biden was criticized for for proposing an increase in the corporate tax rates. And many people said, you are going to kill American competitiveness because anybody who has operations here is going to have to pay a higher corporate tax than they do in other countries, Europe or other parts of Asia, et cetera. And then Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, former head of the Fed, said, well, I think we need to work with other countries to establish one worldwide corporate tax rate, to which most of us in the private sector said, well, if you were a private competitor, you would be breaking U.S. law by price fixing and restraint of trade. What we really should have is countries competing against each other as the most favorable place to do business. And the competition amongst governments works just as well as competition between and among private sector businesses. So I think we're entering a new age where we've got to define certain things. And what American or any political leader has to understand is that any corporate executive must answer to his shareholders, his or her shareholders, because that is an important constituency. It may not be the total constituency. Government is also a constituency, as is labor, as are customers. But shareholders, those people who put their money at risk to support and advance the corporation, the business venture, are among the most important. And under U.S. law, and I believe it's the same most places in the world, a corporate executive owes fiduciary responsibility to its corporate shareholders. And
fiduciary responsibility. I love that, because that's one of the pillars of my industry. Fiduciary responsibility to my clients, to being in the finance sector. But Jim, it's very, I'm very amazed that you bring this up, because you hit the nail on the head by saying this. Because what is that thin line between your fiduciary duty toward your shareholder and your duty as a citizen? The criticism for the United States has always been the corporations, at least in the last 30 years since Reagan. Remember we talked about Reaganomics, how it has failed a few episodes ago, where if you look back, we always hail Reaganomics as the right way. All the Republicans say that, but history has proven to us in the last 40 years, it doesn't. The trickle-down effect doesn't work. By saving taxes for corporations, it does not make the economy more equal or the wealth gap smaller. The richest gets richer, and they do not want to give it out back. And then the criticism with China, before this year was always been, hey, we need to maintain our competitiveness with China or Korea, because Samsung is basically a state-run enterprise. How can we compete with Samsung when they have government subsidies? Or how can we compete with China when their government is having unfair trade practices? So we criticize. And guess what? Look at what China did this year. And by the way, I'm not commenting whether they did the right thing or wrong thing, because as a supporter of free market disciple, as a free market economy disciple, I think the bad companies should be bankrupt, and a profitable company that's run well should keep making money. However, what China did this year, which you already know, they came down so hard on Ant Group, on Alibaba. What they're doing is what we criticize them for not doing, but they did. It caused the company to lose billions, evaporate in profit. If this happened here, everyone would complain. The administration, whoever is in the White Office, probably will lose the next election. But in China, it appears that what they did is right, to rein it in and to control the manipulation of stock prices. And so to prevent this wild inflation. I mean, if the government of China is not the Communist Party right now, if it was any other party, would we still view them the same way? Will we still say that they're this and that? Because the fact is, because of USSR, because of the stigma all the way from World War II through Cold War till now, we view China as this closed-off communist party. But that communism that they're practicing is very different now. It's really. It's also a free trade. It's a free market economy there too. But the fact is, they're doing something to stem the issues. They're seeing the mistakes that we made or the problems we're encountering by not rating these tech companies. Because we know they've testified in Congress. Facebook, Google, Amazon, they're monopolies. They are taking information from us. You want to talk about conspiracy? They affected elections. There's so much good, so much freedom and convenience it brought for us. Mm-hmm. But we don't see the other side, the harm. And the fact Bitcoin prices going up, and then you see what happened last week when the hackers hacked the pipeline and they got paid $5 million. Guess how they were paid? By Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. That's the problem. Mm-hmm. Because then you could commit crime and blackmail, whatever it is, and launder this money without consequence. So all these people that complain about US dollar dominating the world and reining things in, well, somebody has to be a regulator. And by depending on the US dollar, at least we know there is no underground illegal black market. Now there is. And where is this thing going to go? So what I mean is there's always two sides to the story. There's never going to be one perfect solution to all. It has to be a good balancing act. And going back to what you said about our judiciary system, law, the rule of law, you're absolutely right. Looking at Taiwan or Korea 20 years ago, whatever, Asia, so many countries, Philippines, Indonesia, there's a reason why those countries, the people work hard. They do try to implement the correct policy, but they don't have the foundation where the judiciary system is separate from political influence and from the legislative branch. That's the one advantage we have. It doesn't matter what your ideology is or what party you belong to. When you're elected to be a judge, when you're in the system, you know that you have to do it and you have to be blind. You have to go according to the rule of law. And if you're not, there's consequences. You will be removed from the bench, or you will have to quit because people won't allow that. Well, in places like Indonesia, Philippines, Taiwan, you're basically political appointees. There is no right and wrong. There's only what color you are. Are you Republican or Democrat? Whoever's in office right now is who you plead loyalty to. Then what difference is there between those so-called democratic countries like Taiwan, like Republic of China, Taiwan? That's not a democracy. Yeah, the president is elected. Yeah, but you can manipulate the vote, which they did. They could control the media, which they did. They basically the CNN of Taiwan was told by the government, they took away the license and shut them down because they oppose what this current administration is doing. So how is it a democracy when you're doing exactly what the Gestapo and the KGB did? I'm sorry, Jim, go ahead.
No. That's fine. You've put your finger on a whole lot of things, but one of the most important concepts that I think gets overlooked in almost everything, and yet it's critically important, is balance. You have to have balance in almost everything. That's why our three
branches of government
are so important, because the founding fathers said you got to have checks and balances on each other. That's why our three levels of government, federal, state, and local, are so important, because we have different layers of authority and collaboration amongst those. And one of the things that if you're a manager, leader, or owner of a business, you're making balancing decisions all the time. Short-term profits versus long-term investments, investing in technology. You're balancing interests against different constituencies. And very often those things are changing all the time. So what worked in a past time or a different place may or may not be working given the environment today, because things are changing. But it's that continual process of change and interaction which create opportunities as well as problems. And so what I think it means for the individual is you got to be smart, you got to be prepared, you got to be energetic, but you also have to be compassionate. You have to remember that you may be up today, but you're going to be down tomorrow. And your personal reputation, as well as who you affiliate with, is going to survive or fail, no matter what you do. So, I'm afraid that we're losing some of, here in the United States, we're losing some of what we all hold very dear. And I hate to use the word conservative, because a conservative has the implication that you're reluctant to move forward, or you're reluctant to take risks, or you're reluctant to go outside your comfort zone. That's what conservative means. And though I don't think those definitions apply to what I'm talking about, but I do think we need to retain the best of what we have, and some values shouldn't be too flexible. Some values should stand the test of time.
I absolutely agree with you.
The test of place. So
I love what you just said, Jim. Thank you so much. We're running out of time again, but
no,
we always run out of time. But to sum up what you just said, which is so important, conservative, when it's not in a political term, or even if it is not a negative or positive. Being conservative could mean that you're going back to your Christian values, to be compassionate, to have empathy, to care, to want to give out, to give back. What is wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that. And being liberal or progressive, if you want to have social justice, you want it to be more fair for everyone, that is great too. It doesn't have to be parallel. It could cross. You could have compassion and still be progressive. You could be conservative and still be liberal. Sure. People think it's not both. You could absolutely be both, because look, our system is not perfect. There's separation of powers and whatever it is, but it has worked so far, and we're working it out. We're always trying to evolve as society. Our people has always held the government responsible. Our people has always tried. Now, we cannot let corporations and shareholders' interests lead the government, which has kind of come down to that. But in the end, like you said, we got to go back to our roots. We're going to go back to the younger people. Millennials will say, oh, you old folks always want to say, go back to this and that. we're a different generation. I'm the different generation from then. But the fact is, when I was growing up, I hate to say this, we didn't have some of these problems that are created that was not there before. The division.
I'm going to leave you with one final thought. Very famous, very successful American entrepreneur, Charles Koch, K-O-C-H.
I know who he is, the brothers, Koch brothers, yeah.
He has just released a book, and the title is Believe in People. And it's a story of how he built his commercial empire. He and his brothers built their empire by believing in people and the power of bottom-up thinking and contribution instead of top-down. I haven't read the book, but I've read the reviews, and I'm looking forward to seeing the whole book.
I would love to read that book after you have.
Message, yeah.
Jim, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for enlightening us, and I hope to see you soon next week, and I hope to see you next Friday at your event.
Yes, and this time next week, we'll be taping one day before that, so we should have the information that you were asking.
Yes, we are. Yes.
Okay, good. Thanks,
Okay, Jim.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. 各位观众，谢谢。